In the Social Science Thinking Unit for Sub-Saharan Africa, we're going to continue with our discussion of empiricism. To this point in the course, we've largely talked about empiricism as a way to describe conditions that we've seen around the world. But of course, we want to use empiricism and empirical evidence for more than that. We want to explain why conditions are the way they are, develop theories that help us to understand them, and ultimately solve the problems that we're talking about as well. The jump from empirical data to explanatory theory, however, is a long process. In science, it requires a large amount of empirical data and a large amount of methodological research as well. It needs to be distinguished, theory, from the colloquial notion of having a theory about something that's based on largely anecdotal evidence. In geography, there are large numbers of different types of theories that are used. We've talked about some of these already. We've looked at theories of development. We've talked about the demographic transition theory. We've talked about different types of migration theory as well. And of course, there are others. We won't be able to get into all of them this semester. In order to jump to a theory, we first need to be able to find relationships. These are the first steps that are taken in science that use empirical evidence. Generally speaking, social scientists hypothesize that there are relationships between different aspects of the social world, and then they use the empirical data to study those. In the social sciences, because humanity is so complicated, social scientists often use variables that stand in for broad factors of development. For example, if a social scientist wanted to understand the relationship between development on the one hand and fertility on the other, she or he might study the relationship between the Human Development Index and the total fertility rate, which stand for those particular aspects that they'd like to study. Now, it's important to note that there's a difference between a relationship and something that is causal. Finding causal relationships can be quite complicated and generally require a large number of empirical studies. It can be very difficult to prove that one particular thing causes another one, and ultimately is dependent on the development of the broader theories that we're actually after. One of the ways that causation can be demonstrated is by using rigorous statistical methods that show not just relationships but correlations between one variable and another. Relations can be shown to correlate within a certain range of significance or certainty. These statistical methods are outside of the scope of this particular course, but I wanted to make sure you understood that in the social sciences there is a great deal of statistical rigor. In order to ultimately develop theories, one needs to continue to look for relationships, both causal and not. The process never really ends with the sciences. Science is iterative in nature, which means it keeps going on. There keep being more studies to look for more relationships to ultimately build theories. Ultimately, empiricism helps to refine and sometimes even contradict the theories that were once originally posited, and then the process can begin again. I'd like you to think about all of these things when you consider how science works and what we're doing here in this social science class. We're not just looking to describe problems, but also to understand those problems. And we do that through building relationships, by looking for empirical evidence, and ultimately building broad theories.